Hello and welcome to the NASGP's podcast, The Art of GP Locuming. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Amrita Sen Mukherjee, who's joined with me on Zoom. And this podcast will be going out on both our YouTube channel and our podcast or podcast networks. So Amrita, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Richard. I'm really excited to be here today.
Great, it's great. And what we want to do today is have a sort of conversation with you about where you started out as a GP and going through the work you've been doing, and see if there's any really interesting takeaways for our GP audience to both inspire them, hopefully, as carers, as GPs in practice, but also in their careers as well, and in their personal lives. So I think, Amrita, what I'd like to do start first off really is how did it all begin? How did you start off as a GP? When did that happen? Where did that happen?
Yeah, really good question. And I have to always take it back to my childhood. So my father was a single-handed practitioner in a really small village called Rochford, in Essex. And so in those days, I used to spend a lot of my holidays, my Saturday mornings in his surgery, in the waiting room, running up and down the stairs, taking files for him, and just speaking and chatting with his, with the people he worked with, his reception staff. And so I would say, born into general practice, and I spent, my real formative years learning about what it means to be a member of the community, what it means to serve, and what it means to support others in kind of everything that you do. Because for my dad, he always used to say it's a lifestyle, it's not a job. And obviously, that's not something that I really understood until I, grew up and became my own kind of professional person and had my own identity. And so becoming a GP was something that I was always interested in. But then when it came to the point of deciding which career I was going to follow, I, for some reason, deviated towards maths, and then came back to medicine at a later point as a graduate. And unfortunately, during my first year of medical school, my father passed away quite suddenly. And I think that really was the moment at which my interest in pursuing general practice as a career was cemented. It was familiar to me. It was something that I felt brought me closer to my father, who had, departed very suddenly. And I felt that there was a lot of my identity that was sewn into the fabric, essentially, of being somebody who supports their local community.
It sounds like it's hardwired into your DNA all the way through your early years, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. And because, going around on home visits, going to,
Incredible.
I mean, I would sit in the car, but what I mean is that it was a very different time in the 80s and 90s, the way general practice was formulated, essentially. And so it was something that I felt was part of me, as you said, my DNA. And so it was just the next natural progression. So anyway, I did my foundation and then went into general practice training, and my husband and I decided to start for a family. So very soon into my GP training, I went on maternity leave. And unfortunately, during my maternity leave, I became rather unwell. And it was following that I started to re-evaluate where I was going, what I was doing, and whether general practice would be, in essence, the right path for me. I'm making this a much shorter story than it
I'm
was,
sure. I'm
because
sure.
it was very convoluted, and it was very,
Yeah.
very hard and very painful, actually, because if you can imagine, all of my lifelong and childhood dreams had essentially been shattered through this very quick and very quick and fluid identity change that I had experienced. Um, so anyway, cutting a long story short, I went back into training. I tried my very best. I did all the things that I was meant to be doing. I achieved all of my competencies rather quickly. I passed my AKT and I did my CSA all very early, or as soon as I could within my training. And I had another baby. When I had my second baby, unfortunately, I became even more unwell. And I really started to advocate for myself, and I started to advocate for doctors to listen to me. For the previous 3 years, I had been told that I had postpartum depression. I had been told that my symptoms were factitious and I was malingering. And so I had quite a negative experience of my colleagues
It sounds like it, yeah.
and the people who were treating me. And unfortunately, when you have a whole body of professionals telling you something, you start to believe it yourself. And I thought to myself that if I was experiencing these things, it was because I couldn't cope. It was because I wasn't cut out for the career, and it was because, I had some health difficulties, some mental health difficulties that I needed to work through.
So all of that, what colleagues were relaying to you, was actually compounding the illness and the fact that you were taking time off to raise children as well.
Yes. I would say that I was in an environment that was quite unkind. And I was in an environment where I needed to almost just take a time out and say, hang on a second, I just need to reassess what's happening to me. But unfortunately, with the nature of general practice, and this is nobody's fault, it's just there isn't much time to kind of put a pause on things and say, hang on a second, let me just reestablish what's happening to my own self. So I I did a lot of reconsidering as to what my path would be. And as a graduate who had gone into medicine and taking 2 maternity leaves during my training, I was a bit older than people who were qualifying. And I recognized that the power was in my hands, and I could either work in a profession or work singly as a GP, and it make me unwell or compound my illness, or I could really try and do something that utilized my strengths. And I recognized as well from a very early age that part of my father's role as a GP, and because of his personality, was he was an advocate for others. And I thought, well, that's something that I can do. I can advocate for people who are like me or for people who have been through experiences like me. And I can formulate my own path driven around my experiences so that people don't feel alone like I did, and people don't feel the isolation that I did when I was going through these difficulties and
And
challenges.
and was that change in approach, that change from almost sort of being a victim, if that's the right word, to being someone who'd actually taken more control and going to do something about it, was that a sudden change? Or did that come over slowly? Can you remember?
No, it came. I think so the period of time between me starting my GP training and finishing it was 2012 to 18. So I would say it happened through that 6 year period. Um, but in terms of the rate of change, it was quite rapid, if that makes sense. I'd say it was on a slow burner, and then kind of the last hurdle, would we say, was catalyzed by my completion of CCT, and it was like, right, what am I going to do now? I
Okay.
have to I have to move forward with something positive. Um, I think what's really important to recognize is that unfortunately, I feel that the system was challenging rather than people. Like, yes, there was an element of maybe some relationships that I had with people. But I want to make it quite clear that I'm not a victim and I'm not blaming anyone. I think it's really important to recognize that the system and the structure in which we work, unfortunately, doesn't support challenges and difficulties. I think we're working towards an environment where we're more able to have these conversations, and we're more understanding of them, and we're more accepting of them. But I think if you kind of rewind 10, 12 years, it was a bit of a different environment that we had. There are loads of wonderful organizations such as Doctors in Distress, and you have the Disabled Doctors Network. You have practitioner health programs. You have so many different entities now which are well established and offer support to doctors. When I was kind of going through my challenges, everything was very much in its infancy. So I just wanted to highlight that I don't see myself as a victim, and I don't see
Lazy
myself.
on my behalf to use
No,
that
no, no,
word.
no, no, no. Not lazy at all. It's just really important that if that's the kind of narrative that is being developed, it's important for me to just kind of correct that and say, no,
Yeah.
I wasn't a victim. But I was unfortunately subject to unfortunate circumstances and environments.
And not those environments, do you think that is is something that is just inherent in the general practice as a profession, or do you think that background is perhaps, at the moment we talk a lot about overwork and not enough funding, and GPs just having to work really, really, really hard, and do you know, is it a combination, or what do you think might be behind that environment that's caused this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Richard. It's multifactorial. I think, if you look at things in terms of systems, you have individuals, and you have individuals who might have different life experiences or have had different challenges themselves. And so, we have to take into consideration different perspectives and how we all come towards a particular situation with different viewpoints. So, we have individuals, then we have teams. And it's not just the team within which you work and the team within which you have direct contact, but it's the teams within the teams and the microstructures that exist and the microclimates and the culture and these interrelationships and the interpersonal nuances that happen. And then you have to think of that in the wider context of general practice as a body, in terms of, the function of one general practice within a much wider PCN, within a much wider ICB or ICS, however you want to phrase it. And then from a strategic point of view, with regards to funding and the lack of funding, not just in the last 5, 10 years, but
Yeah.
for the last 30 years. And the cultural impact of the change of the general practitioner within the community. So, I was speaking very lovingly and very fondly about the relationship that my dad had within his community, and the fact that I recognize that that was something that I had hoped for in my future. But unfortunately, I think from in the area that I work in and live, that type of general practitioner doesn't really exist anymore. And I think it's really important to recognize why that's the case. Yes, the model has changed. Yes, the whole profession has changed and moved in a different way, but also that kind of systematic defunding and lack of resource and the impact that has on a person, their morale, their appreciation for their role in society, in terms of when you feel undervalued, when you feel like your work isn't being recognized, and not just in a monetary point of view, but from a media point of view and perspective, from the way people talk to you, from the types of difficulties that you might experience in your day-to-day clinics. So I think the whole picture needs to be considered rather than the individual pieces of the jigsaw.
Yeah. So then, when you qualified as a GP, what career path did you take then upon qualification? Was it partnership, salary, GP locuming?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I did pursue quite a lot of options, but at the time it felt as though locuming was the right path for me, because I was very keen on starting a master's. And so I recognized that with the commitment of having 2 young children, doing a master's, and holding an employed position, it might be a bit much for me at that moment in time. So my idea was to do my master's and then kind of move forward from there and see what happens, and try and secure a salaried post following that.
And was the decision? Was it because you just wanted to do a master's, or was there something specific you had in mind?
Yeah, I've always had a lifelong love for learning. I've always wanted to keep feeding my brain, essentially, keep growing and keep challenging myself. During my training, I did, or kind of towards the end of my training, I did my diploma in occupational medicine. And I realized when I was doing that there was an element around workplace well-being that really resonated with me. And I think
Yeah.
probably most likely because of my lived experience of
Yes.
being a trainee GP, who'd come across some health challenges. And so that really ignited my passion in well-being, as a subject, and not just as something that we might use synonymously with mental health, but in terms of the pillars of who we are, how we can utilize our strengths, how we can really leverage our own challenges to propel ourselves forward in ways that we might not have expected. And so that was when I really did my research around what masters I wanted to study. A lot of people were suggesting that I do something along the lines of nutrition or public health or, health management. And I really at that point wasn't in love with medicine, should I say.
Mm.
And so I wanted to do something that was a bit removed from it so that I could almost find myself, essentially. So I wanted to do something that was going to be completely different to anything that I'd studied before. Hence, I went into studying positive psychology.
And you actually did your masters in, was it applied positive psychology and also coaching psychology?
Yes, yeah,
And
that's
was
right.
was that linked in any way to the other work you've done in hidden disability and what's the other word? But the post traumatic growth that you've done a paper in.
I would say that they were born out of the masters rather than the other way around.
Okay.
So with the Disabled Doctors Network, I'll kind of uh, talk about that first, if that's okay. Again, so I have to honour and praise my colleague, Dr. Kelly Lockwood, who set up the Disabled Doctors Network. Kelly found that there wasn't much support for doctors with physical health difficulties. And so she set up the Disabled Doctors Network and was running it single-handedly
Gosh.
for a few years. And then Kelly took a step back. And when she did, I had approached her about becoming a member to support other doctors and to get support myself, because I didn't know many people who were like me. To be honest, I didn't know anybody who was like me, who was working in medicine with a long-term health condition. And that's not to say that there aren't doctors who do that, but it's not something that people were that keen on talking about. Again, I'm talking about 10 years ago now, people weren't that open about discussing their difficulties and challenges. Because of the culture of medicine,
Mm.
we're not that keen to do that for very various reasons. Um, and so I approached uh, her for some support, and she told me that she was taking a step down. And it was from then on, really, that I took an active interest in the Disabled Doctors Network. I took over with my colleague, Jen Warren, and we were co-chairing the network, which is a completely voluntary, non-funded, safe space for doctors to go to when they have chronic long-term health conditions, whether they be physical or mental health difficulties. So that was kind of, I would say, separate, but again, very much catalyzed by my father's influence on me. And then we had my master's, where, again, with the positive psychology aspect, it was completely life changing. And I firmly believe that it's a module that all doctors
Really?
should learn at least in part at medical school. I'm trying to advocate for this, and I'm trying to discuss with uh, the AOME about this, because it really gives you huge insights into being able to offer yourself self-compassion, understand yourself better, reflect in a way that is helpful rather than critical. And it gave me a language around how I could identify with myself and my feelings and my thoughts and behaviors, essentially. So that is really where my master's was, where my, sorry, publication was born from, post-traumatic growth, because when I learned about it, I recognized that that was something that I had experienced. I turned my challenges into something that was propelling me forward. I wanted to use my struggles and my difficulties to help others. And I recognized that as doctors, there was very little research and very little support with regards to physical health problems. And so I thought, if there's a problem and you can't fix it, you can at least contribute to changing the environment around it. And so that was the impetus and the rationale behind my study, because I wanted to give voice to the doctors who had gone through similar challenges but hadn't had the opportunity to be heard.
And when I first heard the word post-traumatic growth, I had to look it up. And it's a very intriguing concept. But do you want to just sort of explain what it is?
Yeah, so post-traumatic growth is essentially, put very simply, is essentially a concept of a person going through positive psychological transformation following either one challenge or a series of life challenges. So anything that essentially disrupts your way of um, thinking, the kind of sense of stability and purpose that one has. So it has to be almost like a catastrophic disruption of a fundamental life belief. But then following that, one has the ability to put themselves back together and use their experiences, not just to help them propel forward, but also embodying them in part of their identity, essentially. So that essentially in a nutshell is post-traumatic growth, using a trauma or using a challenge, a life challenge to regenerate, renew, and grow.
And is that something people need to do consciously, or do people do that subconsciously? Is it by helping people identify and realize they have a disability, a hidden disability, to make that something that's material that they can then use in a positive way as a superpower almost?
Yeah, absolutely. Post-traumatic growth is something that many people undergo without really knowing it, without having the language to talk about it or realize that this is something that they've experienced. So in that way, it can happen very subconsciously. And other people can recognize that actually there's something about their current situation that they want to change. And so they can gain support and garner support using using particular strategies, and find a way through it. But it's really important to recognize that post-traumatic growth isn't linear and it's not singular, in the sense that when one has challenges, it's not that those challenges are not still distressing or cause difficulty or can cause sadness, because actually with significant growth and development can come coexisting distress. And so it's really important to recognize that it's not a binary entity where, oh, you've had this challenge and now you're doing this. That's wonderful because look at the growth. Absolutely look at the growth, but also recognize that these things can be happening in tandem. And the reason I say that is not about other people recognizing it. It's about you yourself recognizing that actually from within, this coexistence of pluses and minuses is all part of the human experience, and it's all a normal part of the human experience as well. And so the reason I kind of am just wanting to emphasize that is so that anybody who's listening doesn't feel critical about themselves if they have or are undergoing post-traumatic growth, that they don't feel, well, actually I do feel a bit sad about this, or I do find this particular thing distressing. That is normal. That is part of the human experience.
You have an incredible CV. You do TED Talks. You do webinars. You're a big advocate for disability and hidden disability. Is that part of your post traumatic growth? Is that part of it, or yeah?
Yeah, I would say so. I wouldn't say what I do is part of my post-traumatic growth. I would say what I am is my growth. Um, all of the things I suppose that you've just mentioned are my exterior. They are
Okay.
the things that I offer the world because I feel um, fundamentally, Richard, I'm a doctor. And the reason I went into medicine was because I have a fundamental value that I want to provide service to others. Um, that has never changed. What has changed is the way in which I'm able to deliver that service. So
Aha.
initially, my vision was to sit in a consulting room and support people at an individual level and be their general practitioner from, the NHS saying from cradle to grave, and be, part of a community and part of a team. Unfortunately for me, that goal did not realize or materialize in the way that I had wanted it to. So the way now I pursue my value of service is by honoring others, my colleagues, my peers, by sharing my experiences with them so that they can use them in a way that is helpful, hopefully helpful. Um, so I would say that my growth isn't the things that I do. My growth has been my change in perspective as to what I am, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that does. As GPs, then obviously many of us will have disabilities of one sort and another. Many of those will be hidden. I think in one of your talks you said it was 80% of disability is hidden. And there may be GPs listening to this now, not even kind of realizing or identifying or come to terms that actually they have a disability.
Yeah.
And so get us understanding ourselves. How should we go about starting that journey then? Is that turning to you and to others? Is it something we can do ourselves in our everyday practice? I'm not
I'm
expecting that
always
you to
very
have an
happy.
easy answer to that.
No, I'm always very happy for people to reach out to me, especially my GP colleagues. It's my pleasure to support my colleagues, and to chat things through with them, to offer coaching, um to do what I can within the resource that I have. I'm always very happy to support my medical colleagues. Um, but the first and fundamental thing I would say to anybody who's listening to this, who might resonate with, some particular challenges, and challenges can be dressed up in any format, doesn't necessarily have to be hidden disability or disability. But I would say the biggest key to any challenge is believing in yourself and loving yourself through it, and offering yourself that compassion, that it's okay to find things hard. It's okay that things haven't gone right. It's okay that you might have made mistakes. And all of that is okay. Again, it's part of the human experience. So I would say my very first piece of advice to people is be kind to yourself around anything. And there are some things that I've spoken about, and some challenges that are very difficult to deal with. And so finding a trusted person, whether that be a partner, a sibling, a parent, a colleague, a friend, whoever it is, talking to somebody and recognizing or offering yourself that opportunity to learn that you are not alone and you are never alone. It might feel as if you are. I'm not minimizing the feeling that people might have, but you can always find somebody to turn to. And if you can't, then you can always you can always kind of send me an email, and I'll see what I can do through the Disabled Doctors Network. But it's really important that people offer themselves kindness and give themselves a break when things haven't gone particularly well for them, or in the direction that they'd hoped for.
And I can see many of our colleagues really that resonating so much as sort of really good advice almost. But I can also see some colleagues really struggling to admit that to themselves, admit that to others, talk to themselves, even consider that they might possibly be struggling. Everybody struggles with that, but I think often maybe as GPs you might find that particularly hard even.
Yeah, and this is the sad culture of general practice and of medicine, Richard.
Mm.
There are so many wonderful, beautiful strengths within our profession. We do so many things very, very well, but caring for ourselves, we do not do well at all. And I think, again, just coming back to my research that was published, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to publish that and to get those voices out there and heard. One, to honour the wonderful participants who offered their time to me, but two, so that we recognise as a community of doctors that we are not alone and these things are happening. And if we as a group can come together and talk about these things, we can raise our voices and amplify them so that we can try and make cultural changes and we can try and make systematic changes. But without hearing the voices, we're not able to really shift the dial on that.
And I think lastly, just to finish off, it would be quite interesting to hear your thoughts on how we as GPs, when we're with patients who have hidden disabilities or disabilities, what can we do in the consultation? Should we ask the patient to come back to talk about it separately? But what can we do to help them to start to make that sort of that positive post-traumatic growth journey if we feel they might not already be on it? Is there anything we can say or do?
Um, Offering them time to speak is really important. Maybe asking them what their biggest challenge is, in terms of not making assumptions around what we think the patient needs, but asking them what they need. And the biggest thing that came out of my experiences, but also that were mirrored in my study, was and I talk about it in my TEDx talk as well, the assumptions and the judgments that are made. As a medical practitioner, when you're sitting behind a desk or when you're seeing somebody on the ward, quite often, because we don't have time, because we are time deplete and we are resource limited, we make assumptions and judgments about somebody's perspective, feelings, and experiences. Now, it would be amiss of me to deny that in medicine, we do have to work on assumptions and judgments when we are making diagnoses, when we're looking at clinical patterns, when we're trying to figure out what the best management strategy might be for a patient in terms of their physical or mental health in isolation. Absolutely, we have to work on those types of problem-solving themes and patterns merging together. But in terms of the lived experience of somebody, in terms of their perspectives and their emotions and their behaviors, we cannot align our own life experiences onto those, and we cannot make assumptions and judgments about those. So I would say offering somebody the opportunity to tell their story, to tell you part of their story, and to ask them what challenges they are experiencing currently, would be a really great way to developing the relationship to support somebody in their journey, essentially. So offering them a safe space.
So listening, that's empathy, yes, safe space. That's really good advice, Amrita. Well, thank you so much for chatting to me today. It's been a really great conversation, and I hope our listeners have got some really interesting takeaways from this. And so thank you for listening. Thank you for watching this on YouTube. Thank you for subscribing to this on your podcast network. And Amrita, thank you once again for coming along today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Richard. Thank you so much.